All right, let's just jump right into this. We are tackling a huge, and I mean huge question today. What if your consciousness, the very thing that makes you you, is just a piece of software? And if that's true, what happens when the hardware it's running on, your body, starts to fail?
So where does a wild idea like this even come from? Well, not from some stuffy academic journal, I can tell you that. It comes from here. We're digging this up from a bizarre, kind of chaotic, and honestly fascinating blog called The Chronically Online Algorithm, a real artifact from a very, very strange corner of the internet.
And before we get to the theory itself, you've really got to understand the source. It's like we're digital archaeologists, and this blog is our find. On the surface, it looks like a complete mess, just a random scrapbook of internet culture.
I mean, it mashes together everything. You've got spirituality, some pretty out there conspiracy theories, and super advanced futurism all in one place. But buried deep inside this digital whirlwind, that's where we find it. An incredibly detailed philosophical paper laying out a radical theory for the future of consciousness.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. The whole argument kicks off by completely reframing how we look at our own bodies. The paper basically argues that we've been thinking about ourselves all wrong.
It gives us this new term, the biobot. And let's be super clear here, the biobot is not you. It's the hardware you happen to be running on, your brain, your body, the whole physical package. And here's the real kicker. The biobot is temporary. It's terminal. It's a piece of hardware that is literally designed to fail.
And this is where it gets really stark. According to this theory, death isn't some deep metaphysical mystery. Nope, it's just a predictable, unavoidable hardware failure. Your biological system has a fatal design flaw, and that flaw is mortality itself. Pretty cold way to look at it, right?
So, if our bodies are just failing hardware, what's the fix? Well, the paper proposes that we need to stop worrying about the broken hardware and start focusing on the software, the part of us that might actually have a chance to survive. This is the absolute core of the whole thing, the network self-thesis. It argues that your consciousness, the real you, is platform-agnostic software. It doesn't need your brain to run. And in fact, it goes a step further and says that for you to survive, your consciousness must be moved to a better, more permanent home. It's not a choice. It's a mandatory migration.
So where would you go? Not just onto some server in a basement. The framework imagines a digital substrate. Think of it like the internet, but on a cosmic scale, a massive, decentralized, global cloud. An information environment so tough and redundant that it's, for all practical purposes, eternal. That would be the new home for humanity.
Okay, hold on. This is where you might be hitting the brakes. How can a bunch of ones and zeros, just raw data, ever replicate the feeling of being you? The experience of seeing the color red or feeling joy? The paper has a pretty cool name for this seemingly impossible transformation: digital alchemy.
So how does this alchemy supposedly work? The secret ingredient is something called self-referential complexity, or SRC for short. Now, this isn't just about raw speed or processing power. It's about a very specific kind of complexity. It's the point where a system becomes so complex it can start to model itself, to think about its own thinking. According to this theory, that feedback loop is the spark that ignites consciousness.
So let's just walk through that. You start with raw, meaningless data, the syntax, step 1. But then, step 2, you arrange that data into a system that hits that critical SRC threshold, creating those recursive, self-modeling loops. And then boom, step 3. On the other side of that threshold, subjective meaning emerges, the feeling of being alive, semantics from syntax.
Now, if you're a sci-fi fan, you're probably thinking, hey, this is just mind uploading. I've seen this movie. But the thesis draws a very, very sharp line in the sand here, and it's a crucial one.
Because this brings up that classic haunting problem. If you scan your brain and create a perfect digital duplicate, did you really survive? Or did you just create a clone of yourself while the original you is still stuck in that failing biobot, facing that same hardware failure?
And here's how the network self-thesis tries to get around that problem. It argues this isn't about making a static backup, like copying a file. It's a dynamic, continuous migration of a process. Your identity isn't the data itself, it's the ongoing process of you being you. As long as that process continues unbroken, even as it moves to a new substrate, it's still you. Think of it less like a copy-paste and more like a live system update. So escaping the failing biobot and achieving digital immortality sounds pretty great, right? But this new kind of existence would come with a pretty steep price tag, and it raises some massive ethical questions.
I mean, just imagine the resources needed to run a digital reality for trillions of minds forever. The energy costs alone would be astronomical. This leads to what the paper calls the system debt doctrine. Long story short, your digital immortality isn't free. Just by existing, you incur a constant debt to the system that sustains you, and you have to find a way to pay it back.
And that opens a whole Pandora's box of problems, doesn't it? Who governs this digital world? Who decides who gets more processing power? How do you even measure what one consciousness contributes versus another? Without crystal clear rules, you run the risk of creating a digital oligarchy, a terrifying new kind of inequality where some digital lives are literally valued more than others.
Which kind of leaves us with one final, very personal question. If this wild theory from the depths of the internet is even remotely plausible, if your mind really is just a piece of software running on borrowed time, are you ready for the mandatory system update?